You're listening to episode 355.
Welcome to Transforming Missions Podcast, providing you with insights and resources you need to lead a movement of Jesus followers.
Today, we're exploring a big question, and that question is, what happened to our sense of community? Sara, have you noticed how different neighborhoods feel now compared to even a few years ago?
Yes, I do. And I hear and I see more extremes. What I'm seeing and hearing is that people either live in a neighborhood where everyone seems to know everyone and they're in everyone's life, and I mean that in the best possible sense, or they're in a community where people come home, shut the garage door, and stay inside. I see and hear very little in the middle, and I get it. At the end of a long day, when you might be peopled out, space to just be with those closest to you makes sense. But I think it goes beyond that. And feel free to disagree with me on this one, whether you're listening or Tim in this conversation. I think over time, our cell phones have occupied our attention instead of the people that are around us. Whether it is on social media, whether it's the text messages coming in, whether having email in the palm of our hands, all of those things call for our attention, beep at us, whatever your ringtone is. And I think there's been a slow fade.
So what I'm hearing you say, or the way I would say it, is that people can be together and still be lonely.
You just named it. Loneliness is real, but phones try to make us, not just any phone, a cell phone, a smartphone, tries to help us feel connected. This commercial, I thought, saying that, it sounds inappropriate. But do you remember the commercial, Reach Out and Touch Someone? It was Bell Telephone. It was Michigan Bell, where I grew up. And what they were encouraging people to do was to pick up the telephone and to call someone. So the reality is, as much as we encourage people to make those connections, none of us are getting rid of our smartphones. And probably the bottom of the list of things that we use those devices for are for actually making telephone calls and talking with people. Some parents make rules for use. Schools can try to control use of phones. But it seems to me we need to find a better way to not only use our phones, or maybe it's just a different way to approach technology so that we understand what it is and what it's for.
So it maybe a way to say it is technology at its best is a tool. So when it becomes a replacement for personal relationships, we've created a problem for ourselves.
And there it is. Tim saying it all in fewer words than I can.
Well, you didn't think we'd get too far into the new year without me saying something about relationships, did you? At the root of it is a loss of connection. And that's what you were saying. It affects more than just our neighborhoods. It trickles into every part of our life, including the church, or maybe I should say, especially the church.
Yeah, definitely. And where my mind goes is maybe the church can be a part of the solution. After all, isn't community at the heart of who we are as a church?
Well, I would say yes. And some would say that's biblical times, not today.
And the kids would say that's so 1900s.
And I would say there are some things in the 1900s we should keep.
I'm with you.
So this fragmentation of community impacts the church's role in today's world.
And that fragmentation that you just named, Tim, is a challenge. But in other ways, here I go again, turning it upside down, it opens up an incredible opportunity. If neighborhoods and other spaces aren't fostering those connections any longer, it's an opportunity for the church to step in and be that space. When I think about Acts 2 and the early church, it was all about community, breaking bread together, sharing resources, worshiping together. It was a way of life.
So let's read Acts 2, 42 through 47 to remind people what it says.
Go right ahead.
So here's Acts 2, 42 through 47. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. Awe came upon everyone because many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles. All who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all as they had need. Day by day, as they spent much time together in the temple, they broke bread at home and ate their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having the goodwill of all the people. And day by day, the Lord added to their number those who were being saved. That's a powerful reminder. But let's be honest, building that kind of community today feels harder, doesn't it? I mean, people are busy, they're distracted, sometimes even skeptical of close relationships. Is that just a Bible story?
But consider for a minute how people become followers of Jesus. We meet people where they are. Here's what I begin to think about. What begins to happen in the church if, let's just take a few groups of people. Mothers with young children might be a group. Men who like to run might be another group. Young professionals between the ages of 25 and 35. What happens if those groups of people, and they're just examples of people with interests, began to come together in the church? Or maybe we begin to think seasonally. What's on people's minds at the beginning of the year? How many things have you seen, read, or watched about goals and resolutions and health? That's what's top of mind at the beginning of the year. Like it or not, participate or not, that's what is in front of us. So what happens if the church is a place for people to come together around one of those, if I can use this phrase, felt needs, and the church helps people to experience something that they don't get from their phones? Then in that moment, you've just started a relationship. And it's there that you begin to invite them to take the next step to experience Christian community.
I like what you're saying. I think that's where the church's unique mission comes in, because we're not just any community. We're not any social group that gathers. We're a Christ-centered community, and there's something deeper, something more enduring. So maybe the question isn't whether it's possible, but how we start fostering those bonds again. How do we become that community that makes a difference in people's lives?
I think I just named one.
You did.
So let me say it this way, and I apologize if this comes across as being offensive to anyone who is listening. That's not my intent. My intent is to reality check the world that we live in and what people are noticing. People don't notice a church building. People don't notice and say, or spontaneously wake up on Sunday morning and say, we're going to go to church today. So if we want to be in relationship with people who are not already a part of our congregations, if we want to be a part of building a Christ-centered community and expanding that community, as the church, we need to find a way to build relationships with people by considering what are their needs. Tim, I'm thinking only because I've heard you talk about it at the church that you're at now. One of the things that you all are seeking to do is care for young children in and through the preschool. Guess what? anyone who has a young child who also is employed outside the home, they're likely going to need childcare. It's a very basic need. But if you meet people in that place and ask the question of how can we build relationships with them, that it's not simply a transaction of, yes, we care for your child, you pay a fee, but there's a relationship building there, then you can take the next step to ask the question, okay, what do busy families need? What do young married people need? Stopping and asking the question, what are the things that are top of people's minds, that are in front of them, that are not being met or that people have an interest in? One of the other things that, and this is not new, but this has been an ongoing conversation, anything around mental health. Since the pandemic, people have needed places to care for their mental health. What might the church be able to do to bring people together for a conversation around that? That we're modeling a sense of community in a way that they experience something different than they would experience if they just sat down across the table from someone that they work with. So you might consider age, you might consider interest, you might consider marital status, you might consider family life stage. Someone who all of their children are now grown and gone has a very different need than someone who is just starting their kids in school. And that brings me to the last one, is the season and time of year. What do people need now? And it's likely that if you stop and give it some thought, you already have a hunch of what those needs are because you hear it from people in the congregation. But it might be worth either asking them to ask a few of the people that they know, or simply being quiet and listening to their stories to draw out what some of those needs are.
Where we create spaces for people to gather, even informally. And just some of those that are simple that I know where I am now that happens, it makes a big difference, is a coffee hour or a shared meal, or those are things that help break down barriers and help people feel seen and valued. Do a lot of reading and sermon preparation now, much more than I did over the last 10 years. And I ran across this story that I think illustrates what we're talking about. We just have to adapt it for our situations. And it was Fred Craddock, in one of the first churches he pastored. He said at Easter was always a time of baptism. Easter Sunday was a big baptism day. And so as the candidates, and the baptism wasn't done in the church building, it was done at a lake. I think he called it Watts Bar Lake. And so after the church service, everybody would come out to the lake and there would be a meal. And then there would be a time when people would be baptized. He said they had temporary little shelters put up so people could change clothes and they could go and to be baptized. And he said, so we led them into the water and they were baptized and they would come back out and they'd change their clothes and they'd sit around the fire. But it was around the fire that there was a ritual in that church that, and he said his name was Glenn, and he said it was always Glenn who did it, but he introduced the people who were baptized. He would give their names and where they lived and where they worked. And the rest of the people who formed the circle around them, and this is the part that I wanted us to hear, that the rest of the people would form a circle around them while they stayed warm at the fire. And the ritual was that each person in the circle would give his or her name and then say, my name is, and if you ever need somebody to do washing and ironing, or my name is, if you ever need somebody to chop wood. My name is, if you ever need somebody to babysit. Or my name is if you ever need anybody to repair your house. Or my name is if you ever need anybody to sit with the sick. Or my name is if you ever need your car a ride to go to town. And they'd go around the circle. And he said they would eat and they would celebrate. And then at the end of the time, he said it was a man by the name of Percy Miller, I think. He'd always stand up and say it's time to go home, and everybody'd leave, and he'd linger behind and put the fire out. And then he said, and this is why I'm telling the story, he said Craddock said he looked at me and he said, Craddock, folks don't ever get any closer than this. And Craddock said in that little community, they have a name for that. They call it in other communities too, but in that community, the name for it was church.
That's good.
That's what we're talking about. Now, we have to put that in a 21st century kind of place and context, but that's what the community is about. My name is, and if you need, and we're in this together. So, and that's being intentional, and that's being who we're supposed to be, being intentional and creating places for that to happen.
Yeah. Well, you're naming and lifting up the gifts of the saints. That's community. Powerful. That's a powerful example. I'm not surprised that it's a Craddock story, but I am surprised that at what you shared, because I can read your mind. No, I can't. What I thought you were going to say was be intentional when you're meeting with leaders about inviting people to experience connection, because I've witnessed you do that in beautiful ways as well, just by asking simple questions.
Well, I'm sure. And that's the way I think that's the way we encourage people to share from their heart. But you ask questions, and then not because you already know the answer, but it's because you're kind of priming the pump.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the question in the story, what's one thing that you can offer if someone might need? What is one gift that you can offer to this community? And it might be doing something or being present in a different way. And it's a beautiful illustration of asking that open-ended question. I think one of the mistakes that we make is that we'll say things like, "How are you?" that really people can answer. How are you? You know, well, do you really want to know? Or are you really just saying hello to me? And how often is it people are really just saying hello? That's a different question than what's been meaningful in your life this week? Or where this week have you experienced Jesus?
Yeah, I think, Sarah, I mean, I really like that, but I think that's part of the reason that when people ask me how I am, I kind of throw them off by saying, well, I'm relatively well. Then I find out whether they really want to know or not.
Right. And just as in that story that you shared, it doesn't take a lot. It's a simple question. And at the very same time, building relationships like that with anyone and also in the church, it takes time. And it's worth that effort that we put in to make that happen.
And if we remember who we are as followers of Jesus and developing that community, then every interaction we have is that we're reminding people that they are truly valued and that they're seen. So it's not about, you know, it is as simple as how are you or where have you seen Jesus? The reality is, are you actually going to listen to what's being said?
Exactly.
Because you're developing a relationship.
Exactly. And here's how I'll say it. I have been a part of meetings or experiences where a question like that was asked, and all it was an item on the agenda.
Right.
You're doing more harm if it's just an item on the agenda then if you don't truly want to hear what the answers are and you don't truly want to have conversation, just don't ask the question, because you're not helping by going through the motions. You could likely be doing more harm, because then people are like, well, you asked and you didn't even listen to what I said. And so the next time, if you really do want to hear the answer, they're not going to give you anything because they don't think that you want to hear it. So yes, how we approach that is an important part of that journey. Can I shift us just slightly? Because the beginning of building relationships can feel and be a bit awkward. I think I'm thinking of this because over Christmas I met up with her for lunch, a friend that we met the first day of high school, and we joke till this day. She thinks I said to her, "Will you be my friend?" And so we just joke now. Will you be my friend? Are you still my friend? Because think about it. Your first day of high school, you're sitting down at homeroom, and we sat down next to one another, and we had a couple of classes that were the same. And so it was, I don't know what was said, but it can be awkward, those beginning moments. But when trust is built, there's something else that was a part of the Acts 2 scripture, and that was accountability. The early church wasn't just about coming together and going through a list of questions, having a conversation, eating some food. It was about life together. And that life together meant that there was some accountability in that. So, Tim, I'm wondering if you think people today are open to that type of relationship or proximity or input, closeness. I don't know what word to use there in their life.
Sara, that's a tough one. I'll dodge it by saying I think it depends on how you approach it. I mean, people can be wary of accountability if it feels judgmental or forced. But when it's rooted in care and mutual support, accountability is a gift. It's about walking alongside each other and not policing each other. And I think it depends. I haven't said this one in the new year either. I think it's where you start that makes the difference. That if you're starting with the love of God or the love of neighbor, accountability then is upon how you're loving one another. If you're starting with any other place, I think accountability does become judgmental, from my opinion.
Yeah, that is a good word.
I think there's a part of accountability that we don't consider very often, and that means accountability is celebrating together. We mark milestones, we share joys, we lift each other up. And the bottom line is, we're being Christian. It's about the whole of life and not just the struggles of life. And it's those celebrations that might even be easier to make happen than focusing on all the struggles. So when people see others care for them, there's a feeling of hope and possibility. And when you're celebrating other people, that becomes contagious in a good way.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, the church has a beautiful opportunity to be a place of connection in a disconnected world. We can offer something people are longing for, a sense of belonging and a sense of purpose.
And I'll go back again to intentionality. When you're intentional about creating those spaces, we don't just become a place people visit on Sundays. We become a true community, a family of faith in which people, if I may use this word in the best sense, are then adopted into.
Yes. So here's our challenge for you this week. What's one step that you might take this week to foster deeper connections, whether it's in your church, in your neighborhood, or even your family? That's my question. But Tim, what are the final thoughts that you have before we close out this episode?
Sara, I think there's a place we have to practice this. I mean, we can, you and I both know that we've talked about this a lot, and we can say it, but if there's not a place for people to practice, and so why not have the church community be the places where you begin to practice asking those questions you're going to ask people on the outside, outside the church building, outside the community of faith, so that even in times of worship, um, just having each other turn to one another and just say, "It's really good to see you today. How can I be of love and care for you today?" Now,
Yeah.
I know it seems strange, but if we don't practice it, we're never going to do it.
And I think you hit on something important there, Tim, that I am surprised by the number of people who are surprised when when I stop and listen. When I ask a question of, they might have mentioned something about their child or grandchild, whatever it might be, whether it was an illness or they were doing something in school, and you inquire again. It's not something that everyone experiences all the time anymore. That simple care for and careful relationship with people. So if it feels awkward or if it feels weird the first few times, or if you get a strange look, don't give up. Keep going.
I on Sunday after worship, and I didn't ask if I could share this, but I'm sure it'll be okay. Um, I had a woman that stopped me and said, "I need to tell you what happened to me this week." Now, it's all based upon we're talking about being who God created us to be, or talking about divine love in a human form. And she said, "This is how it happened." She was at the gasoline station, and she noticed that in the bay next to her there was a woman in tears. And she said, I just couldn't have her stand there crying. I needed to ask, "Is there something I can help you with?" And she said, the woman said no. And she said, "But you seem to be in distress or pain. Is there any way I can help you?" She said, "No, my son died this morning." And the woman that was telling me the story said, um, I had to say to her, "I can help you." And she said she hugged her and let her cry. And then after a few moments, she said, "May I pray for you?" And the woman said, "Yes, please." She was telling me that story because she had connected what we were talking about in the church about being a divine love in human form. I think that's our mission. I think that's who we are. And it seems strange that that would happen in a gas station, but why not there? And why not in our schools? And why not in every place that we gather? There are people who are hurting. We don't know that they're hurting. But if we're aware, if we've become sensitive to God's work in our lives, then we can become aware of how God's working in other lives. And we can just offer ourselves. How can I help? The idea behind it is I'm going to love the way I've been loved. And that's, again, taking the initiative. It's creating a place, even if it's in a gasoline station. We have the opportunity to create community. That's who we are.
Christmas isn't celebrated just one day. The incarnation's with us to stay.
That's right. What difference did that baby being born in a manger make for you today?
Yeah.
That may be
Yeah.
the question.
I mean, we might be beyond the Christmas season, but we're not beyond the incarnation.
No, we're not.
We're invited to continue living into that. Thank you for that. And thank you for joining us today. Let's keep finding ways to be the church in this fragmented world. And we'll see you. We won't see you. We'll join with you next week. So, as a reminder, you can join us on Facebook. We've started posting some questions that should be relatively easy for you to respond to on the Transforming Mission Facebook page. And we would love for you to participate in that as a way to begin, and hear me say begin, the process of developing connections. As a reminder, you can find show notes, including the link to the Facebook page for this episode at transformingmission.org/355. Tim, will you send us out from this podcast?
Let me remind you that when you leave this podcast, you will be in the mission field, for there are people who need a kind, caring, supportive, encouraging word, and that word has already been given to you in Jesus. The joy and peace of this life comes in sharing what you've received. So go in peace to experience the joy in the name of the living God who loves you in Jesus and who empowers you to develop community through the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.